Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan. Now if you watch this channel a lot, you know that I really don't like game developers that release a lot of trash every year. And one of those corporations I criticize a lot is Ubisoft, because they're probably one of the most prolific game makers of the modern era, and they've made a lot of duds. Now recently, I have been noticing that their games are getting progressively better. While Watch Dogs Legion was sort of meh, the Assassin's series of late, especially with Valhalla, is making me rethink the company a little bit. I mean, pillaging monasteries in medieval England turned out to be exactly what I needed for 2020. Sure, we judge barbarians and Vikings when we see them pillaging undefended settlements, but there's a real and palpable joy that accompanies this sort of activity. I think it's a lot healthier to let out your anger and frustration through physical exertion rather than just shitposting on the internet. Now, of course, I'm not going to immediately put Ubisoft in the same category as its betters like Rockstar or CD Projekt Red, but it is starting to close the gap with, some struggling developers of late like Bethesda. It's getting better. I mean, this realization that Ubisoft might actually be trying to make good games made me think a little bit more about the company and its many different franchises and the type of games that it tries to make. Ubisoft is clearly very invested in this open world strategy because it gives the player a lot of replayability, and that's kind of wonderful for the fan base. But at the same time, I'm starting to notice a really strange thing about the storylines. In almost every Ubisoft game, it always contains some kind of conspiracy theory. First, let's talk about the Assassin's Creed game. For those of you who have never played Assassin's Creed and have only seen trailers of the game, you might think of this series as a period piece game that is set in historically important moments in human history, from ancient Egypt to the American Revolution. But lurking behind that main story is oftentimes a shell story that takes place in modern times. That involves two ancient factions known as the Templars and Assassins and their endless battle for control and domination of the future of humanity. The Templars are basically all about control and restricting freedoms of your average man, whereas the Assassins, the so-called good guys, are all about liberty, individual freedom, and a little bit of chaos. These are overly simplistic descriptions of very complex groups. I mean, there's like 9, 10, I don't even know how many games there are now in the series, but there are a lot of games. And according to Ubisoft, most of the powerful figures in history that we know about were aligned with either shadowy group and were attempting to do larger things than what history books are trying to tell us. For instance, Charles Lee wasn't just a disgruntled military leader who was passed over by the Senate when they gave George Washington command of the Continental Army. In Assassin's Creed version of history, Charles Lee was actually a Templar whose role was to assassinate George Washington and hand over the newly formed nation of America to the Templar. A lot of the Assassin's Creed storylines read more like a Dan Brown novel with some more science fiction tropes like evil mega conglomerates and genetic memories. I, like probably most of you guys, lost track of the story, especially when it got really convoluted about aliens and like biblical artifacts. But the point is, nothing is as it seems. Ubisoft is attempting to make us think that behind the normal world that we all live in is a second shadowy world where the real important things are happening and where determined men and women are fighting for the real important issues that guide humanity. Whether that's true or not doesn't really matter. It's just a brilliant sales tactic, I believe, by Ubisoft, and it really does involve a healthy amount of confirmation bias on their part. Because let's be honest, people who play video games all day, including me, are not the most productive or successful people in the world. We're more likely to be labeled as basement dwellers, fringe of society escapist types. And whether that stereotype is true or not, Ubisoft has clearly labeled its gamers as such. And so, if Ubisoft believes that gamers are more likely to go to their fictional worlds for an escape, they must assume that we reject the real world and all of its trappings and structure as well. And so why not call bullshit on all of the political and social structures that run the world, especially when your fan base most likely is not involved in those structures. Let the people hear what they want to hear. In Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, we meet Oliver Garneau, CEO of Abstergo Entertainment. It's the video game wing of the Templar-run faction. He's one of the bad guys in the game, and he would once again reappear in another Ubisoft world, Watch Dogs, where he meets his untimely death at the hands of another Ubisoft hero, Adrian Pierce. Now, the Watch Dogs franchise might be connected to the Assassin's Creed universe, but it doesn't feature ancient orders battling against each other. Instead, this Ubisoft world focuses around the encroaching threat of surveillance states powered by extremely dominant high-tech companies that have almost eclipsed government in power. This time around, the heroes are hackers in an organization known as DedSec, and their goal is to keep their city an open and free operating system. The most recent entry to the series, Watch Dogs Legions, takes place in the futuristic version of the UK, and the central storyline involves a false flag attack used by the government to create a privately run police state. In Watch Dogs Legions, instead of having one protagonist, you're allowed to literally recruit any NPC from the street and play as them. This idea of playing as anyone is another attempt by Ubisoft to not only change up the game's formula, but also to make gamers feel more a part of the game's message and cause. So we have Assassin's Creed, and then we have Watch Dogs. We also have Far Cry, which also has some of the same elements, but where did this all start? Well, you have to go all the way back to 2000, when Ubisoft first purchased a company called Red Storm. Red Storm Entertainment was the brainchild of Tom Clancy, who had wanted to turn some of his work into video games. The Rainbow Six game had just released in 1998, and it followed a fictional multinational counterterrorism unit and its mission to stop a biotech company from spreading an extremely contagious strain of the Ebola virus at the 2000 Summer Olympics. Rainbow Six would become one of the most successful tactical shooters in gaming history. Rainbow Six Siege, which was released in 2015, is still a mainstay in competitive online gaming. Before the acquisition of Red Storm Entertainment, Ubisoft was releasing games like Prince of Persia and Beyond Good and Evil and other more fantastical games. If anything, the Assassin series is a merge between the gameplay and settings of Prince of Persia and the classical Tom Clancy story tropes and shenanigans. Rainbow Six wouldn't be the only thing to spawn off of the Tom Clancy license. There's also the Ghost Recon series, which tried to let players experience what it was like being a special forces operator. These were small squad-based games that also featured a heavy amount of tactics. In Ghost Recon's more recent iterations, Ghost Recon Breakpoint and Wildlands, the tactical shooting has merged with Ubisoft's love for massive open worlds. Then there was the Tom Clancy Splinter Cell series, which was more stealth-focused, and you would play as a guy named Sam Fisher, who's this kind of lone covert operative who works for the fictional branch of the NSA known as the Third Echelon. All of these Tom Clancy games featured big terrorist organizations and baddies who are either fronted by evil multinational corporations or corrupt parts of the government and military. The story usually unfolds in layers, and no one is really who you expect them to be. More recently, The Division has taken the Ubisoft formula online to the MMO community. This time around, we follow a special agent of the strategic Homeland Division after a strange virus outbreak turns America apocalyptic. So who do you imagine when you think about your average conspiracy theorist? A guy, middle-aged perhaps, not the most financially successful, removed from society in a way, but probably enjoys a healthy amount of video games. Is that also what you would describe the average Ubisoft gamer as? How many people were first introduced to conspiracy theories through a game like Splinter Cell or Assassin's Creed? How many people were kept interested in this repeating theme that is prevalent in all Ubisoft games? At the same time, when Ubisoft was on the rise in the early 2000s, we also had quite a lot of conspiracies that were unrelated to gaming, like Y2K and the 9/11 truther movement. Now, research in cognitive behavior have pinpointed certain types of personality markers that make you more susceptible to conspiracy theories. What they found was that these are generally more suspicious individuals, untrusting, eccentric, and they tend to regard the world as a more inherently dangerous place. There's also one other factor, and it's for these individuals to feel like they're special and as if they hold access to some knowledge that no one else knows. Furthermore, conspiracy theorists tend to simplify over complex real-world situations that they might not be able to understand. The current pandemic is a great example. It's pretty easy for an individual just to believe that one government entity is behind all of this. The reality that a virus could just naturally form and kill hundreds of thousands of people randomly is terrifying. It's almost calming to think that humans were somehow involved and still in control at this point. So fear and rejection is a central part of being a conspiracy theorist. I mean, why else would you question a society that you perfectly fit into and really enjoy being a part of, right? And this goes back to the former statement about how the world views gamers and the stereotypes that are made about gamers. Despite the gaming industry's attempt to make gamers look cool and trendy, they're definitely still not. And there's probably more than a little truth about the social problems that a lot of gamers probably encounter. If you have the option to either stay home on Friday night to play the latest Assassin's Creed game or go out with your friends to a bar, the more often you choose that staying at home option, the more likely you will eventually become socially isolated. And as you become more isolated from your friends, you're more likely to buy into one of Ubisoft's many protagonists who are fighting against an evil system that is not allowing you to do what you want, which in the case of Ubisoft is to buy more of their games. Because why face the real world and all of its terrible truths when you can just stay at home and experience it all through a screen? So as you can see, Ubisoft really loves conspiracy theories, but I want to know in the comment section below why you think that is. Is Ubisoft trying to open the eyes of its gamers to make them question everything around them, or is it just some kind of marketing scheme to make their fans more isolated and more loyal to their brand? Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. My name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie and you are the protagonist.